set your voice free. It's about vocal instruction, and the guy, his last name is Love. I think is Daniel Love, David Love. I can't remember, but he talks about. At one point, he was a vocal coach for Rob Thomas, and I think he was for a little while a vocal coach for Sting. And he talks about the fact that the vocal cords are your own personal instrument, right? And
Yes.
air instrument, out of all things, and that everybody can sing. It's just a matter of what's your range, right? Some people have the Mariah Carey range, and some people have a very, narrow range. But if you learn how to breathe and you learn how to stay in your range, you can sing anything. So the problem comes in when you're trying to sound like someone else, right?
Exactly.
And so I do appreciate that, and I challenge accepted. I am very critical of my guitar playing skills or lack thereof, right? But I think it's important to stay within ourselves, and for us to engage with music as a personal journey, right? Because, like you said, the benefits are countless, and the research keeps expanding on it. And that's the next point I actually wanna dive into. So it's kind of a nice sideway on music and mental health, because you mentioned a triage there in the beginning. You do the music professionally because this is your love, is the love of your life. You've done it since you were a little kid, but then you also are doing it for the mental health aspects that are very much needed in the community globally today. And also you're talking about climate change and some of the social things that matter to us as a global community. Walk us through that process. What happens? Let me actually ask the question differently. What has to happen to a musical score in order for it to then transcend from something that is just personally joyful, but now also be useful from a mental health point of view, or useful and appreciated from a social point of view, for example, social singing, especially in the modern classical domain?
Well, that's a really great question, and a one-word answer to that is inspiration. For me, that's the number one thing. So the other thing that we know about music that's so important about music is that music is communication. Music is a language, right? That's why we can all come from different cultures, different backgrounds, speak very different languages, and listen to each other's music and be brought to tears, or have like a deep human connection, even though we don't have a way to communicate with conventional ways like you and I are communicating right now through words. Music is so deep that way, and that's what I love about it. It's such a unifier in the world. Now, the idea for me, as people often, ask me, like, how do you describe what you do as far as composing music? If you have to put it into simple words, well, the technical definition is I pick notes on my piano and I combine them into patterns, and then poof, you listen to those patterns. That's the technical thing. But I also like to think of myself in sort of non-musical language, is that I'm in the communications business. I'm in a content creation and communications business. That's what artists, in essence, are doing. Now, as an artist, unlike someone like an entrepreneur, an artist, what they do is we create something on our own or with partners and that type of thing, and then you put it out into the world, and then you see how people react to it. That's entrepreneurship is very creative, like being an artist, but it's a little bit different. An entrepreneur looks at the market, sees what's needed, and then provides that thing. So that's what often makes it more challenging for an artist, is that if an artist takes an entrepreneurship mentality, they're not really an artist anymore, because they're not creating something which is a communication from themselves. So I think that's what it really is. So in a nutshell, what my job is, and what I love to do, is I love to be inspired. I will have a conversation like you and I are having right now, and there's something that you're going to say that's going to get triggered in my head, that's going to motivate me to go and sit down at my piano and have my laptop and hit record on my laptop and start playing, because there's something profoundly moving or thought-provoking that you told me that I feel like my reaction to what you said can be translated in the language of music. So the only difference between me and other people, some people will go through that same type of like interaction with another person or another form of communication or art, and their reaction will be in words. They might write a blog post, they might write a book about it, they might paint a picture about it, that kind of thing. They might just talk to somebody else about that, talk about their visceral reaction to what just happened. I often do those kind of things, but for me, my preferred way to do it, just as how I'm wired, is I just love to do that through music. And so often, what you're hearing in my music, I write a lot of notes to accompany my compositions, and often that's what I'm talking about in my program notes for a lot of my compositions and my albums. It's just talking about, why did I compose this? And that's why I've had very random topics my compositions have explored, right? From deep things like climate change and but I read a book by the Dalai Lama, and I composed a whole album of electronic music based on my reaction of what I learned from his book, right? And then I've written pieces about, I watched a TV show or a movie, and I had to write a piece of music about how that particular character on that particular show or movie made me feel. And there you go. You have this piece of music that people can experience in a different way. So for me, it's a really simple answer. It's nothing fancy. It's not like really contrived. It's really impromptu. It's just like, I like to think of my musical practice as being an extension of who I am as a human being.
So when we met 6 years ago out in Portugal at that Mind Valley conference, you shared some of your music with me. At the time, it was instrumental. Are you still, instrumental, or do you incorporate vocals in your compositions?
Yes, I basically, this is the beauty about doing this for a while now. I've been very fortunate to work on a lot of different projects, a lot of different type of music projects. So I've done like band-like projects where I'm working with, jazz and rock musicians that have vocals in them, or instrumentals. I've composed like traditional chamber music. I've composed musical theater. I've done a lot of work with electronics, more orchestral things. So you name it, I've had a chance to really do it. And that's the other aspect of my life that I really love a lot, is that every time I like changing to different types of projects. It keeps things fresh for me. I think that's, if anybody's sort of working in a creative profession or any type of profession, if there's somehow you can keep things fresh for yourself, where the types of things you're doing change up, it always makes it exciting. I think if I've done my fair share, because I started off as a piano performer, I've composed a lot of solo piano music. And in my early years of working before, I didn't have a lot of people maybe who didn't want to collaborate with me because I was unknown. I would, like, to get my life going, I would write my piano music and then perform my piano music and record it. And so I've done my fair share of that. But I tell you, if I spent my whole career just composing piano music, I'm very proud of my piano music. But if that's all I did, it wouldn't work for me. And that's not to say that people who do that kind of thing, I don't disparage them. I think it's great. I'm just talking about myself, and every human being, I think, is so multidimensional. And so my music I want my music to be a reflection of the many multidimensional natures that, I'm used to in my own life. And I think that's really important. And it doesn't have to be through music. I think it's just different experience. In fact, my wife and I are often talking about, we're so intense into this musical life, which is great. And we're very lucky to be working on a lot of different things. But we're often like, oh gosh, we need to have something different. we need to go in different directions. So I experience that within music, and then I feel like, oh, I've got to make sure I'm taking care of myself outside of music too.
No, that's wonderful. Let me ask you. I mean, I have so many questions. I need to keep them in order in my mind. But when you, again, back to that triage of your personal journey, and then making music that is useful from a mental health perspective, and then making
Yes.
music that is useful from like a social environmental perspective. Uh, when you go about that, and you mentioned, yeah, it's like, oh, I saw something and that made me feel something, so I'm going to write something about that. Do you find yourself going the path of academia in the sense of, oh, you know, I want a
No,
particular feeling, so I'm going to stick with majors versus minors versus augmented. Obviously that
I
music
got it.
theory, because we all know, I mean, certain notes have a certain feel, right? So do you kind of architect that in your mind? It's like, okay, this is going to have to be a minor type thing, and then let the creative juices flow, or did you just forget about music instruction, construction, and just play?
Absolutely. That's exactly what I do. So just really getting deep into my creative process. Like I said, I in my at my desk in my office, I have a nice big electric piano that's hooked up to my laptop. And often what I do when I'm sitting down to start composing a piece, I have a certain feeling, a certain emotion, certain story, and I just hit record on that computer and I start playing and I play and play. And so the fancy word here is improvisation. I'm often improvising. I get as many ideas out as possible. I've been in situations where basically the final composition, the final piece that's out there, was basically one super long improvisation, hardly any editing. Most of the time I go back and then I'll really edit a lot of these ideas and try to put them in perspective. But one of the beautiful things about my journey with music that I feel very grateful for is that I got to start it early when I was 5. I often say that I remember when I started lessons, I didn't really actually know how to read real words when I was like, I pretty well knew how to read music before I started reading real words. And so because of that journey, it's made it really intuitive. And because it's so intuitive, um, because it's so intuitive, uh, it allows me when I sit down in a creative process to just let things come out, right? It's sort of like exercises where people will say, "What's the first thing that's in your head? Just say it right now. Just say it." You know what I mean? And that for me is the most genuine type of thing. Sometimes, sometimes are like structurally the music can get really sort of more organized, or you can really shift things around once you get it out. But I always have to go through that initial exercise. And it wasn't always like that. I always felt that, music has to be very structured and very organized. And when I sort of put that away and just say, okay, let's just be me. I'm going to be me through my creative process. That's where it became more gratifying for me, more like therapeutic, and more cathartic. Sometimes I write pieces that's not very happy and can be on really sad ideas and sad themes, but it doesn't make it torturous for me. I think of it as cathartic. It's a learning experience. And I have to go through that, and it's a wonderful experience. It's a great form of just sort of in essence getting things off your
It's
chest.
wonderful. So let me ask you, Sting, we mentioned Sting earlier. I mean, I love his music. I follow his music quite a bit. He said something once that just, I cannot get it out of my head. He says, he said, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he said something about when he's performing in front of a crowd, that one thing that he does, that he's done for many years and he still does to this day, is that he's listening to the listening. And that's how he connects with the audience, and that is at least one of the best parts of being in music for him is to have that connection of listening to the people. There's a special sound, I guess, to lack of a better word, when people are listening. Something happens when the audience is listening, right? And but you only get that when you have an audience, right? So, I'm assuming that in your life, your day to day or week to week, month to month, year to year, you have some balance of the time that you're writing, the time you compose, but you also perform, in front of other people. Uh, do you resonate with that, and is that something that you thrive for and to get to, and that inspires you to keep writing, but because you want to be in front of that crowd and experience that listening?
Oh yes, for sure. That's one of definitely the big perks of the job. That's for sure. You know, I have been very lucky to perform my own music and for audiences, and then interact with the audience after the performance and hear their reactions. But often you don't even have to hear a reaction; just the presence, the energy of your fellow human in the room is very, very, very evident. And we really learned a lot about that. What you're describing, Rafael, is something that as humans we've been doing for thousands of years, right? We know the first music making was, people in caves, right? Living in caves, the cavemen and that type of thing. And, that's when music making became so important because it was a form of community building and storytelling, right? And ever since then, as musicians, we have always had that relationship with a special, very deep, close bond with an audience. And in our recent history, unfortunately, we learned how important that is, and we couldn't take it for granted, which was during the pandemic when everything was in lockdown and people were in self-isolation. We saw countless performances online where, various musicians of various things were in empty, sound stages or concert halls, and they were performing. And almost to every person ever interviewed in that kind of thing, they were like, "I'm so grateful that I could share my music," but
Yeah.
just wasn't the same. Wasn't the same. Like, so as musicians, we always tended to put an emphasis on what we're doing because we're the focus. But what I love about what we do is that ironically, it's not just about us, It's about the audience. If you're an audience and you go to your band's favorite show or a great singer, or even if you go to like a Taylor Swift thing with, tens of thousands of people in a stadium or whatever, you are just as important participant than her on stage or her band or that kind of thing. You are that so important, and not just important to her, for business or financial reasons or notoriety reasons, but to your fellow human being. How many people have you stood around in a concert and you're swaying with a complete stranger right beside you, and you're like your best friends for some reason, you don't even know their name? I mean, this is in essence the intrinsic thing of being human. This is what we need more in our world to bring us closer together, right? These kind of moments where we can share these kind of moments.
No, that is wonderful. That is, yeah, I always get a lot out of being in a community of people listening to someone perform. Hopefully, I'll get the opportunity to see you perform, one of these days. Let me ask you, do you see, is it easy for you to jam with other musicians? Or, and I ask you because my son, one of my three kids all played music, growing up, and one of them took it a little bit further than the other two, and he's become, a very gifted. He loves classical music. It's all, he plays a cello, he plays a saxophone, he plays the bassoon. I mean, he's very gifted, and but one thing he won't do is jam with me. because he doesn't feel
Right.
that, like he needs that sheet music structure, with a team of
Right.
people, and everybody knows what they're doing, and then together collectively they bring something to life. um, do you relate with that, or are you kind of a freestyle kind of person?
I'm both. I'm a little bit of both. I love my composing work because I love being alone in my thoughts. And that's sort of like how the equivalent of people might spend time
Mm.
journaling or meditating. I also meditate a lot. So that's a big thing for me, to sort of go on to another plane. But to be immersed within my own thoughts and be to be introspective, composing is a wonderful thing, and that I have to do by myself. I literally feel like I'm all alone in the world when I go into that headspace. It's a wonderful
Mm.
thing. Same with learning music, especially sort of more traditional classical sense. To take a piece of music that you love so much and then start and not be able to do it, and then put in the time and the repetition and go through a creative process in a holistic way, or a training process, in order to train your your muscle memory and your hand to eye coordination. What a wonderful
Mm.
process for a human being to do that. But I know a lot of people that music for them is purely communal, right? It's like they will never play music if they're not in a
Mm.
band. They've got to be in a band, and they've got to be enjoying it that way. And I love those people too. And this goes back to the point I was making about music earlier, is that music, as I said, is a form of communication, and it's a language. And if you think about every single person we know in our walks of life, that there are so many different people that are beautiful and thoughtful and unique in their own
Mm.
way, right? We know quiet people, who do their best work, and and are content and comfortable, and in sort of with less words, and maybe being alone a little bit more. And then we know extroverts who need to be out there and that type of thing. The musical tent, everybody belongs. All kinds of people are within the musical tent, and the sort of musical the ways you can experience some musical interactions is how you just said it is quite beautiful, because there's no wrong or right way. I think as a dad, I can see what you mean. You wish maybe you can have that kind of
Yeah.
interaction, but at the same time, I know probably deep down in your heart you respect your son for the way he's just wired, and that's how he loves it. And then instead you have other ways to interact with him and be close to him and stuff, even though you love music so much, and maybe that would be nice. But at the same time, it's like anything in life, maybe we wish we could do this or do that with people we know, but if they're not wired that way, it's not realistic for us to expect that from them, because music is a very intimate thing, right? And it's a very, very, very personal and intimate thing for a lot of people, of how they do it, because there's so many ways you can do music.
No,
So
you're absolutely right, and it is a matter of how everyone experiences the process of either creating or performing music, right? And I've learned to respect that too. So yes, you're right. I have a lot of respect for him, for all three of my kids and the various things that they do. But the fact that he needs that structure, I understand it, because we all need to experience music in our own personal way. For
And I know you very well, and I've got a chance to meet you, but I've never met your kids. But I can pretty well guarantee your three kids are very
Oh
different than
yes,
each
they
other,
are.
aren't you? And you have a very different relationship with each of the three of
Yes,
them, right?
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
that's a beautiful thing. If your three kids were like the same personality,
Yeah,
life would be
yeah,
pretty boring,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah, and even in the music tent, I love that term. In the music tent, all three of them learn how to play different instruments.
That's amazing.
One continues to play, and the other ones became consumers of music, and they consume different styles of music, right? And for me, that's again part of that process of using music to bring people together. That they listen to some of my old stuff, right? Some of the 70s and 80s, stuff, but they listen to the new stuff too. And I think that is, for me, one of the beautiful things about music is when paid attention to in a wholesome way, it does bring people together, no matter, like you say, who they are, name, age, generation. It doesn't really matter. It's just a wonderful thing that we can all enjoy together. Frank, I told you in the beginning we were going to blink and then time was going to fly.
You were not lying.
I wanna do what I always do, and it's just
Sure.
give you the opportunity. The podcast is Three Thoughts On. So let's talk about something that you can leave the audience with. As you know, inspiring and challenging is my theme. In this domain of the beautiful music you produce and you perform, what are some three thoughts you want to leave the audience with before we depart here?
Yeah, thanks. I love this concept, and I love the name of your podcast, by the way. That is the best thing. So number one, and just maybe this is just summarizing some of the things we talked about nicely, so beautifully today. It's been such a great talk. But number one definitely is encouraging everybody to try to learn an instrument or sing or join a choir. There is not one human being on this planet that shouldn't have the opportunity to do this. And if you're looking to better yourself and to give yourself so much fun, that's a great thing. And then related to the number two, related to music, especially because it can be imposter syndrome and this kind of thing. If you do get into it, do never try not to compare yourself to others. Rafael, you ever seen the movie Florence Foster Jenkins?
I have not.
Starring Meryl Streep?
I'm gonna write that down.
Everybody should see the movie. It's a 2016 comedy musical called Florence Foster Jenkins. Meryl Streep stars. It's a true story about a rather well-known and famous person who loved singing, but to most people who heard her, she was terrible. But she didn't care. Never seen a story like this. If you want to talk about the human experience and about our relationship with our fellow humans and that kind of thing, and how we can overcome a lot of our dispositions or our hang-ups or quirks and that kind of thing that inhibit us from going forward, watch that movie. Even if you're not interested in singing, that kind of thing. It's wonderful. And finally, number three, the one thing that it's taken me decades to learn from being a musician and creating music is a simple one: be you. Anything you do in life, it's so important that you just be yourself as you go through it. And it's been especially important in my creative process, because the moment I sort of think I don't have to do what I think people want me to do because of the position I had, or this is what a composer is. So this is what society normally expects from composers because of the many hundreds of years of composers that came before me. So I have to go down that path. No, you figure out what path you want to create to be your own unique version of you, of what you do in life. And that's, for me, the number one thing, because that, in essence, if I don't have that, I have nothing.
That is wonderful. Where can people find your work, Frank?
At my website, frankhorvat.com. Yes, I'm on most of the social media platforms and stuff. So I love to hear from people and hear people's reactions to what I do. So that's wonderful. But yes, everything I do, I just put there on my website.
Frank, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for making the time. Thank you for sharing your gift with the world. For those listening, please go check out, Frank's website. The music is beautiful. It'll touch you. Frank, thank you. Please say hi to your wife for me.
Thank you, Rafael. It's been a
Let's
pleasure.
talk soon.
Thank you so much.